episode of the On the Move podcast as part of the Move events. I'm your host, Grace Dawes, and today I'm joined by venture capitalist legend Tim Draper. How are you doing today, Tim?
6 o'clock in the morning where I am.
Oh no, I'm so
So these are the first words out of my mouth this morning. So very happy to be here on the move.
I'm sorry to get you up so early, but thank you so much for making the time to see me. So you will be on the keynote stage at Move America in Detroit this September.
Oh, this is exciting. Last time I went to Detroit, I was at an auto conference, and I was the first investor in Tesla. And they said, "What advice would you have for the auto industry?" And I said, "You missed the electric vehicle, so you better make them fly." And they were very angry because all they really wanted to do, I said, "Just go start a company and do something." And they said, "Well, what if we want to stay in the car business?" I said, "Well, then you better make them fly." And it was not well taken. But I'm looking forward to going back to Detroit. I hope they've made them fly. I mean, we have EVTOL companies and jetpack companies and all sorts of companies that are making them fly. That's a different kind of on the move. We got rockets, we got investments in rockets and rocket fuel companies and all sorts of things that are on the move. But we'll be on the move for a lot of different ways, in a lot of different ways.
Well, that's the whole point of Move. It's about everything that does move and with a kind of side quest of doing it sustainably. So electric vehicles, like you just mentioned, EVTOL, it's all part of helping climate change, sustainability, and finding other ways to move. So tell me a bit about yourself and your involvements within the mobility sector. You mentioned that you're an early investor in Tesla.
Well, I was an early adopter on mobile phones, but just as a user. And they started in the car. We used to use car phones. And I remember getting a car phone, and I had my first call in a car phone as I was driving. And I was having so much fun. I talked and talked and talked. I missed my exit by 2 or 3 exits. And then I realized where I was. I'd been driving down 280, missed Sand Hill by 3 exits, and I had to turn around and come back. But mobility has gone so far from there. And the idea that we can do so much in such a short time is probably lost on somebody who's just kind of getting going in their careers. But it was like magic to me. My wife was angry because I was late. She said, "You're late. I'm hungry. Why aren't you here?" And I was at the office and I said, "Okay, I'll take care of this." And I turned and I went, Uber, DoorDash, and I arrived as the food arrived and I was a hero. And the world has become so mobile. And when people give, I don't know, Jeff Bezos a hard time, I always think, that guy, every time I push a button, get a toothpaste and toothbrush in 4 hours from wherever I am, I kiss his shoes. The guy is awesome. Look at what he's done. So mobility, I love the title of your podcast because mobility is everything. We have self-driving cars. We backed cruise automation very early on. I've been in a Waymo in San Francisco. If you ever get to San Francisco, you got to try one of these Waymos. It's fantastic. I couldn't believe it. It's a whole different experience. I was with my son and there wasn't the extra third party in the car. And the car just took off and we were watching, we were saying, whoa, what's it going to do now? It was crazy. We're also investors in 2 electric boat hydrofoil companies. Navier is one, and I just bought a Navier. I'm really looking forward to it. They drive over the sea the way you're driving in a car. It's that smooth. And we were early investors in SpaceX, first investors in SpaceX, and that took off. And since then, we've been investors in all sorts of vehicles, space stations. We have investors in 2 space station companies, 1 rocket fuel company. You talked about climate change. We have an investment in a space station company. It's called Max Space. And they shoot something that looks like a deflated balloon up into space, and then it opens up, and eventually it'll be the size of a football stadium. And then I talked to the guy who started the business, and I gave him an idea that I had gotten from this kind of wild, mad scientist in Korea called Dr. Nakamatsu. He said that if you put an umbrella over the hottest place on Earth that's 3 miles wide, about 5 kilometers wide, you will lower the temperature of the Earth by 2 degrees. And so I've given that idea to the Max Space guys because they're already putting big space stations up there. And they can have those space stations move to the hottest spot on the Earth, and they can aggregate them so that they end up being 3 miles or 5 kilometers wide. And think of this, if they put so many up there that the temperature of the Earth gets too cold, they can start to separate them and let more sun in. So they can actually start to control the weather. I think that might be the next great, amazing thing that happens to the world. So very excited about that.
Yeah, maybe that's where the next big investment lies. Who knows? And I understand you've also been an investor in Baidu as well, which is another autonomous vehicle brand.
Oh, that's funny. I do, because we back Baidu as a search engine, but yes, they have autonomous vehicles, they have AI. It's quite an amazing company in China. But they're stuck with a dictator. That guy, President Xi, he thinks his country's better off if he tells everybody what to do. And that's so wrong. The strong leaders are the ones who trust their people and they set them free. And we're seeing that happen in the US, which is kind of interesting. I'm seeing a lot of freedom, and that freedom gets you starting to think creatively. It makes so much difference. You get this sort of like, oh, well, then I can do anything. And when you feel like you can do anything, you do stuff. But if you feel like you have to wait for the leader to say it was a good idea, then nothing's ever going to happen. And President Xi doesn't quite understand why China was growing at 8% a year when he arrived, and it's flatlining now. And he doesn't get it. He doesn't realize it's like, trust your people, set them free, create a free market.
So sort of a related question, I guess, then is, as an investor, a very passionate investor like yourself, where do you draw the line between politics and investing?
We have something called the Draper Innovation Index, and we publish it so anybody can see it. And it is an index that shows the best countries in the world in order for innovation. And it's a dynamic chart. So you'll see, when Paraguay opens up, you'll see Paraguay move up 10 spots on the list. When Bukele decides to make Bitcoin a national currency, you'll see El Salvador move 40 spots up on the list. Milei has done great things for Argentina, and he's trusting people, setting them free. And that country is really rocking and rolling and moving up on the innovators list. The US, UK, Canada, Switzerland, Singapore are all very high up on the list because they generally have a lot of freedoms. And the ones that don't have a lot of freedoms are Congo, Chad, Venezuela. Those are the ones that don't do well in the innovation index. So I watch that. And we also have one for states. So like Texas, Florida, Wyoming, or all Utah, they're all great states for innovators. And where California used to be, they've just slowly dropped. And California, Illinois, and New York, they're all dropping on the innovation index. So we use that. And I look at that and I say, well, where do I want to invest? Where physically do I want to be to invest? And I like to look where a country or a state is on the rise. That's where I try to put my money, because if you catch the inflection point, as we did in China, before Xi, there was Deng Xiaoping, and he was an extraordinary leader, and he trusted people and set them free. And I followed it, and I just happened to hit the inflection point just right in China. And then when President Xi started telling everybody what to do and stealing from businesses, I got out of there. So I was the first Silicon Valley investor in China, and I was the first one out. So we do choose where we want to put our money, and it does flow freely throughout the world. And there's some great things happening here in the US now, and so I'm looking there. Great things happening in a lot of countries in South America, and so I'm looking there. And India is on the rise. I think India has some real stability. It's a good democracy, and I think Modi is a good leader. So that's what I look for. Europe has too many rules in general. They just have too many regulations. They trip over themselves. But there are some extraordinary entrepreneurs that come out of Europe. So the education is quite good in most parts of Europe. So we see a lot of immigrants from Europe who become entrepreneurs and they're very successful. And a few European companies that show promise.
Well, it's a very interesting way of seeing where you're going to invest next. I wanted to ask you what you think about the recent tariffs that have been obviously everywhere in the news and completely unmissable. How do you think it could affect your field of business? How could it affect that innovation?
Look, I think I am a free trader. I like free trade. I feel like that is where we want to get. And I think President Trump, I believe he believes in free trade. Maybe he likes to have an advantage. But what I think he recognized is that the US was Thidwick the big-hearted moose. I don't know if you've read this Dr. Seuss book, but Thidwick was the big-hearted moose. And first there was a spider living in his antler and he made no deal about it. And then there was a squirrel living in an antler. And then it was like it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And Thidwick was a big-hearted moose and he said, you know, host above all must be nice to his guests. And so more and more of these things came on to his antlers. And then he molted. He swam to the other side, and they're all screaming, say, Thidwick, wait, what are you doing? He got rid of his antlers and he swam across to the other side of the lake. Well, I think the US was Thidwick for a long, long time. And I think what President Trump has recognized is that we have been very nice hosts and we have allowed everyone else to give us tariffs, and we did not have them. And so he decided that he would lead everybody to free trade by putting huge tariffs up there and having everybody come to the table so that together we could lower them. And he said, well, the US will just have tariffs that are like half what everybody else's tariffs are, and he'll move them down as the other countries move them down. So I hope this ends up with free trade around the world. Maybe it had to be done.
And so how do you feel like it's affected your practice of business in terms of investing? Do you feel like it's affected your innovation index scale?
You know, in some ways, it feels like, whoa, he's taking away all these freedoms, you know, that free trade all the way around. And in some ways, he's moving toward more freedoms. I do feel myself gravitating a little bit more toward US investing under this leadership, but it's mixed. You know, I'm moving quite a bit of money to Argentina because Milei is so much of a freedom guy. Hey, that's a tough one. It's tough because I think short term, really tough on everybody. Long term, probably really good for everyone, not just the US, but everyone. So I think we'll get there. And I think most of the leaders of the world are smart enough to realize that, hey, yeah, let's lower our tariffs.
I also would like to ask you what advice you would give to investors or even startups that are looking to extend their businesses, or even what's the best piece of advice you've been given in your time?
Well, change of any kind really favors the startup because the way I look at startups are like boats in the ocean. Companies are like boats in the ocean. The huge companies are these giant freighters that move seemingly very slowly and they just move forward. And then if they have to change, it takes a long time to move it 5 degrees south or 5 degrees east or whatever. A startup is more like a little boat in the ocean, and they can turn around 180 degrees and go in a different direction. In fact, most of the great companies in the world were startups at one time that pivoted. They started in one direction and they pivoted to something else. So I think startups will do very well in a time like this. There is a lot of change going on. And so I'm very bullish on Draper Associates, which is my venture fund. I'm really excited about putting this next fund to work.
So I guess your main piece of advice would be embrace change.
Yes, actually, that's my piece of advice for everyone all the time. People have a tendency to like if they've got something going, they don't want anything to change, but they have to keep moving, or the change will be more of a threat to them longer term. Bitcoin's a perfect example here. Everybody with a bank account thinks nothing should change. I'm okay. Everything's fine. But Bitcoin showed up and all of a sudden there's better currency. You know, if you look, people say, what do you mean better currency? Well, look at it. It's like, you know, here's the dollar and here's Bitcoin. And the dollar has gone down against Bitcoin consistently for the last 15 years. It's not as good. People are starting to recognize that. The people who are adapting to that change are doing very well. Economically, they're doing very well. But change can happen slowly, as it has so far in the currency world, or it can happen really fast. And let me explain. Silicon Valley Bank went out of business, and I got 15 calls from various startups. And they all came to me saying, hey, Tim, can you bail us out? And I said, what do you mean? Well, all our money was in Silicon Valley Bank, and now it's going out of business. And it's Thursday, and we got payroll on Monday, and we are personally liable for at least 2 weeks, maybe 4 weeks of payroll. And payrolls can be very large numbers. And so in all those different cases, I gave them various options. And then Monday rolled around and the US government bailed out Silicon Valley Bank, so we didn't have the crisis. But now all of my startups, I say, okay, I want you to have a treasury group. And the treasury group should put some of the money in a big bank. And they say, oh, okay, yeah, of course. And I say, yeah, and some of the money in a small bank. And they say, why? Because the US government can't bail out a big bank. They can bail out a small bank. And then some of it in Bitcoin. And they say, well, why? And I say, because there may be a moment when all the banks, one after another, go boom, 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 out of business. And you're going to want to hold on to the currency that lives on. And so they all are doing that. My father one day when I was 10 years old handed me $1 million bill, and he's got a big smile on his face. And I said, $1 million, this is awesome. 10-year-old with $1 million. And I was, oh my God, what can I do with it? And he goes, nothing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, that's $1 million Confederate dollars. And the Confederates lost the war, and they inflated out, they printed more money, they did everything they could. And it was like $1 million to $1 of Union dollars. And it was a panic situation. Get me Union dollars. I have to have Union dollars because nobody accepts these anymore. I think the same thing may happen with the dollar. It'll certainly happen with the Nigerian naira and the Venezuelan bolivar and a number of these currencies that aren't trusted at all. It'll happen in a pretty fast way because we got social media. Everything happens super fast with social media. If you invent a cure for cancer, everybody in the world's going to know within a day. So now you've got a currency that's better than the last one. And the moment I can pay for my food, my clothing, my shelter, and pay my taxes all in Bitcoin, I don't need dollars or pounds or euros or pesos or whatever. And I won't hold any because there will be no reason to hold them. I will have, made the complete transition to, all Bitcoin and all Bitcoin economy. And you don't want to be stuck as a business, as a family, or as a government without holding a bunch of Bitcoin when that happens. And that's why you're seeing the US government and a lot of other governments putting Bitcoin in their treasury. I think it is irresponsible for a family not to hold Bitcoin in their own accounts, because if they don't, I think you should have, like, if you're a family, you should have 6 months worth of Bitcoin sitting somewhere, because it is completely irresponsible right now to only hold dollars. Things could go very badly for your family if you're only holding dollars.
And a lot of automakers actually have been starting to accept Bitcoin when people buy cars, so as a form of purchase.
Oh yeah, I've bought some things in Bitcoin. I kind of regret it because I paid about $1 million for about 20 books.
Oh no.
But that was, buying it for Bitcoin. But over time, eventually, Bitcoin will find its natural place. I think it's probably at $10 or $20 million per Bitcoin. Although if the dollar goes to zero, then Bitcoin goes to infinity against the dollar.
So, just a final closing question, obviously it's a very broad one. You've given us so much advice and so much amazing expertise and insight in this chat, so thank you so much for that. But as a last question, I just wanted to ask you if you would like to let me know what you think the biggest opportunity in this space right now is, as you see it. So in mobility, but throughout economy, trade order, all of that, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for investment right now?
I think the biggest opportunity for people who are just getting going or starting a business or whatever is to go to Draper University or get on Meet the Drapers, the show, and pitch their ideas or their businesses, hopefully their businesses. You can go to Draper University with just a passion and an idea. Because I think what we do is we get you kickstarted. We get you started. I'll give you the arc of Draper University. The arc is, what's the biggest problem in the world? What do you face? What do you feel is the biggest problem in the world? Everybody has a slightly different one, or quite a bit of different. And then how are you going to solve that problem? Okay, a lot of people find problems. That's easy. Then how are you going to solve that problem? Then it's a little harder. Then it's, how are you going to create a product or service that solves that problem? And then that's a little harder. And then how do you make money with that product or service? Because if you're not making money, you're part of the problem. You're the one who needs something. And then how do you spread it to the world? So we have that arc, but we also go through some very unusual mental, emotional, physical training so that you become a true entrepreneur, because you got to be resilient. High school in most countries, whether it's social or it's academic, they try to force everybody into a box and make you all the same. And everybody feels uncomfortable if they're a little different. Well, in life, you want to be a little different, and you want a team. You want to operate as a team. You don't want to be all fighting for yourself against the world. You want to be part of a team to go develop something, make something great happen. Our training should be to encourage people to go deep in different areas and to encourage them to work as a team. And so I think high school needs to get that right. I think when you work as a team, you work harder and you learn more.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and thank you so much for your expertise and your advice as well. And I really look forward to meeting you in person in Detroit in September at Move America.
Terrific. Yep. Thanks so much, Grace.